And we're live. Welcome to the House Einstein podcast. This is House Einstein podcast 55. Hard to believe that we're up to 55 and we are on a roll. In this podcast, we'll be discussing the big change that seems to be occurring in the marketplace much faster than many people predicted, and that is how climate change is impacting real estate trends. And in particular, Zillow this week added climate change data. They announced they're adding it, although it's harder to find. And we did find it, and we've got some things to talk about. But before we begin, it's probably best we do that little disclaimer.
And who are you, too?
Oh, who am I? Well, I think people know who we are at this point, but all right, maybe not. Maybe you're new to the podcast. All right, if you're new to the podcast, I'm Osman, and I am the founder of House Einstein, a brokerage here in Boulder, Colorado. I work as a real estate agent serving buyers and sellers, primarily in Boulder and the mountain communities, but I also venture down to Denver and all the way north into Fort Collins. We also have other agents on the team besides the four of us, and those agents also cover Boulder and Denver and the resort mountain towns. And so, in fact, we have an agent that lives in Denver and loves to work on Denver deals. So don't hesitate to reach out to us if we can be of service to you in the real estate world. And Hamish, who are you?
Pretty much that's it. I'm Hamish. That's all. No, I help the team kind of keep the wheels greased, so to speak, and assist, a broad range from contracts to marketing to clients to showings, everything in between. And today we're working on the podcast.
Here we are.
Here we are.
So, disclaimer, this podcast is entertainment. Please consult with your own financial and real estate advisor if you are considering making any investment decisions, any major life decisions. Consult with your professional advisors. This podcast is entertainment. That's what our attorneys have told us to say, and that's what we're telling you. So please don't make your actions based on this. I also could easily have conflicts of interest as a real estate investor myself, and you should be aware of that. And I think that's all we need to say from a disclaimer perspective. If you are a client, just pick up the phone and we will give you advice on your specific, unique real estate situation.
Same goes if you'd like to be a client. Pick up the phone. You can find us at houseeinstein.com.
This podcast is sponsored by House Einstein. We're a real estate brokerage based in Boulder, Colorado. Our market footprint covers Denver to Fort Collins and several mountain resort towns, including Breckenridge and Winter Park. Our goal at House Einstein is to help you make a smarter real estate decision. You can learn more at houseeinstein.com or our YouTube channel, where you'll find videos on neighborhoods, specific listings, and much, much more. Absolutely. So let's go through the topics du jour. So Asheville, North Carolina, flooding. Tampa Bay real estate is crashing, particularly in the low-lying places in Tampa. And climate change real estate is real. And Zillow chose almost the exact day that Asheville is getting nailed by Hurricane Helene to announce that they're going to start putting a climate risk score that addresses fire, flood impacts. And that's almost the same day that Helene hit. So very interesting to see that occurring so quickly.
Picked their moments.
What's that? What did you say, Hamish?
So they picked their moment.
They did. Probably really poor timing. And we'll talk about why further on in the podcast. We're going to talk a little bit about what to expect with rates that have dropped a little bit and what's coming in 2025. The team had a really good conversation, a really good meeting. We looked at the data and we looked at what we're seeing on the ground. So I want to have a little conversation about what you might expect as a buyer or a seller. We're also going to talk about the major disruption happening in real estate with regards to whether agreements are required before you can even tour a home, and a whole bunch of unexpected consequences from the NAR settlement. Probably not what people that want more transparency had hoped for. In our famous self-promotion section, we're going to talk a little bit about feedback systems, and we're going to also talk about our amazing new listing that's going live in Shanahan Ridge and should be live by the time you hear this podcast.
And will be linked below.
It will be linked below. There are several sales of the week we're going to cover. Very interesting deals to think about, particularly here in the city of Boulder. There's a couple of news items that we're going to touch on. And last week, I really wanted to save some time for Carveouts, which is just sort of a new segment in the podcast where we talk about what's kind of top of mind for us, what's happening in our world outside of all these real estate topics. And then we'll wrap it up and see you next time. That's how we'll run the podcast.
That sounds good. I'm confident that we'll be short and snappy, as we, historically have been.
Well, hopefully we're entertaining, as promised.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to continue to, rather than tease with the feature topic, we're going to lead with the feature topic. Your time is valuable, and teasing you just to keep you on the podcast for longer doesn't feel like a good way to treat you as a listener. So we appreciate you listeners and watchers, and so we want to make sure we respect your time. And if that works for you, great. If you think it would be better at the bottom of the podcast, of our content, at the end of our podcast, feel free to leave us a message. We love the comments we get on YouTube as well as other places, and deeply appreciate all of you for joining us today.
Absolutely. So, top topic. Are we doing the Asheville, or are we going into Zillow?
Well, I think we should. These topics are related. So for the last at least 10 years, I've been having conversations with clients about the potential impact of climate change and how that will affect real estate values here in Boulder, how it will affect supply and demand. And I've been thinking about climate change for a heck of a lot longer than 10 years. In my undergrad, I even did a bit of study of certain species that were impacted by climate change that we were censusing in my former science life as a climate change project to see how this population of frogs, as it happens, were changing over time in response to hurricanes in particular as they hit the island of Puerto Rico. And so that has always been in the back of my mind for almost as long as I can remember. I still remember the Time magazine cover when they showed planet Earth wrapped by plastic and what the greenhouse effect was and the sense of discomfort that gave me. But now in my professional world, I've been doing this 20 plus years. I think this is my 21st year in the real estate world. Watching this play out in real time is really something. And a lot of people, I think, are under the delusion that it's a problem for the future with respect to the real estate assets, but it's clearly a problem for now. And this week, Zillow announced, well, actually it was last week, Zillow just announced that they are going to put these climate risk scores using data from a company called First Street. And so I went down the rabbit hole and I couldn't find any scoring on Zillow's website. I didn't look on their app. I honestly try to avoid Zillow because they are just such a mess. And I have access to the real data, not Zillow's reinterpretation of the data. But I went to First Street itself and signed up for a 7-day trial account. I recommend you do the same if you're curious at what it looks like in Boulder. But really what I want to talk about is not that this is in any way a surprise. It's really, if anything is going to be surprising, it's going to be the speed in which the market potentially starts to respond to the varying degrees that climate change is going to impact the United States in general. And so, yeah, as everyone knows, Tampa got some the Florida coast got severely hammered, as it does frequently. And there was an article, I think, in the Wall Street Journal. We're going to put article links to all of the stuff we talk about into the show notes today. But Boulder Reporting Lab has a couple of great articles. The Washington Post had a great article. The Wall Street Journal, which I don't think I actually put the link into the notes so far, also had a great article about how everyone's selling their Tampa real estate. And really, the sensationalism aside, it's really the low-lying areas of Tampa that have suddenly seen a massive increase in sellers. And, of course, rates are high, so there are far fewer buyers. And that comes at a time when we're seeing Florida get hammered by a hurricane. And then all of these Appalachian communities, including Asheville, North Carolina, seeing massive flooding from the hurricane event, from all the rain that resulted from the hurricane. It's all over the news. And so Zillow chose this particularly interesting time. So what happens when buyers can easily see a risk score of climate change? Will that immediately affect the market? Probably not. But at the same time, it certainly increases awareness of the problem. It's sort of like, I mean, people have known, right, Hamish, that the Colorado mountains have fire risk.
Yeah.
Like, this is not... How many fires have we had in the last 25 years here in Boulder that have destroyed thousands of structures, the majority of which weren't in the mountains, but in the Marshall Fire?
Yeah. And I mean, Colorado's had like the Black Forest fire was the really big kind of like super expensive one. And that was probably a decade or more ago now. I don't even think I was around in the country then.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one that was outside of the Springs.
Yeah.
And the fire came down through the mountain community. It was wind driven. And large numbers of structures burned. We've been lucky that the death count and the casualty count has been very low. And I think that touch comes wood. In place from our vehicle lifestyle that gets us out of harm's way quickly. But it could easily have been a lot more people, particularly if a fire event happened at night. Mm-hmm. If the Marshall Fire happened in the middle of the night, there would be a lot more dead
especially the way
people.
that spread and how fast it was.
Right.
Yeah, I'm interested too. I can see, everything's divisive these days, and the climate is not sheltered from that. In fact, I think it's a little bit more of a touch point than most. But I can imagine there's a crowd that's going to see that climate score and completely dismiss it. And then I think, when you have kind of Boulder tends to be a little bit more science-based or, a little bit more... I don't know a little bit more reality driven. So maybe the Boulderites are going to put a little bit more weight on what the score is that Zillow reports it to be. As far as like how quick it's going to impact things, if it impacts at all.
For sure, Boulder buyers are very, very well educated. There's no argument, and there's a lot of data scientists here in Boulder. Not just academics, but professional investors. There's people that look at data for a living and think about data for a living, and they're not going to ignore data as it affects Boulder. But at the same time, it's like one of these pacing arguments, right? It's the frog in the pot that's slowly being raised to boil. At some point, it's death level, right? And I think that we're starting to see
it's getting warm.
Clearly much hotter weather, much drier weather, much stronger thunderstorms, much heavier rain events from like the 2013 flood. Mm-hmm. And so the awareness is increasing. Are we at the tipping point where large numbers of people are bailing out of Boulder real estate? I think it's probably a long time from now. That's my personal and professional opinion. And I don't think that Boulder real estate is likely going to see dramatic shifts or the entire Front Range. It's not just Boulder. It's everything. Pueblo all the way to Fort Collins. Are we going to see... Pueblo, right? I keep calling it.
I kind of liked that. Yeah.
Pueblo, all the way to Fort Collins. We're going to see increasingly dry weather, increasingly strong storms. When we have a wet event, it's going to be dumping a lot more, and we're going to probably see more flood and more fire. There's no doubt about it. But will that make our market unattractive to live in? Probably not. Most people have a short memory for these things, and they don't seem to happen often enough that it will likely result in an exodus from the market. And you could even say, look, Phoenix is 115 degrees this week, and has Phoenix seen a massive exodus of people out of...
growing.
It's still growing.
Yeah.
So I think the right way to think about this is that as a investor, you probably want to diversify and not have all of your eggs in the Front Range. Depending on your holding period. If your holding period extends past 10 years, you probably want to diversify. That's what I would recommend. I love real estate as an asset class, but it shouldn't be the only thing in your investment portfolio.
Diversify, right?
And if you decide you want to go heavy on real estate, maybe not have all your real estate in Boulder, but the unique challenge of real estate investing is that you really should be investing in what you know. So unless you're spending months at a time in a different market, learning that market, there really, I wouldn't advise you to go run off and buy a bunch of real estate in another city. And what's funny is Asheville. So we've been talking about it,
right? Good segue.
And we also, my wife and I have been talking about where would we potentially invest in other real estate, and maybe have a summer or winter home someplace, or maybe buy something in the Northeast where we have family and friends that we visit for 3 months of the year, and the rest of the year it's vacant, or maybe we rent it and have it as a retirement home. That was one of our conversations. And Asheville was actually one of those cities that we were looking at as a climate change hedge, as a place that should have been reasonably protected. And so I looked at, because I was curious about these scores. I did pull up. I did sign up for that.
I was curious about their
Street
rubric,
Yeah. So First Street, it looks like they didn't rank Asheville particularly high as high probability for being impacted by flood at all. It all looked like most of the residential real estate was low flood risk. And of course, we don't know the full impacts. But I guess the takeaway there is, even if the risk modeling says it's low probability, it's still some probability. And it really, I think the right way to think about it is often to have conversations with you and your loved ones about your risk comfort. And like we were considering solar up here at our house in 4 Mile, and the costs were a little high. And then the realization was that, that we may not own this home in 5 years. And so we've blown the payback period, and we've invested in a real estate asset that could be declining in value in 5 years because of fire risk. Mm-hmm. So maybe we should hold off on doubling down by investing more capital into this home, even though it feels good and the energy
you get a little bit of that.
Amazing, and I can drive my Tesla down the mountain with a bigger smirk on my face or whatever. It doesn't actually make investment sense. So we've put the kibosh on that. But let's hit a couple of, I guess this is this is where tell me something I don't know is kind of meeting the news, right? Because the news is about the hurricane impacts that have recently occurred, and the news is also about how Zillow is going to change the market by putting these climate risk scores on individual properties. They're probably going to get sued too. I mean, they've been sued many times over their Zestimates. People have been very unhappy with the Zestimate, the automated Zestimate. So I'm sure they considered their liability for putting scores on it. But you as a listener can sign up today at the First Street website, and you get 7 days for free, and then they start charging you like $35 a month. I think it's really broad level or super high level information. Like nothing in there is surprising. Like if you pull up Boulder and show the map for Boulder fire risk, it's high fire risk and extreme fire risk. There's no low fire risk in Boulder County. And extreme fire risk is up here in the mountains, and it then drops as you go far enough in elevation to closer to Nederland. It goes back to severe or high from extreme, and then in the city it's still high, but it's not. There's nothing low. So no surprises in what their fire map looks like, fire risk map looks like. And our friend Tim, who is a reporter at the Boulder Reporting Lab, had a really interesting article the same day that Zillow was putting out this news announcement that they're going to start adding these fire risk scores, that Boulder is not the worst place in the world. And climate scientists, if you ask them where you should move based on natural resilience, they talk about New England and the upper Midwest, like Wisconsin or Michigan. I mean, that's not news to me. Maybe it's news, something that you didn't know as a podcast listener, but those are the areas of the country that appear to be statistically less likely to see negative effects from climate change. But that doesn't keep it from becoming an Asheville, even if the numbers look good statistically.
Yeah, there's no guarantee. And I think, the Tornado Alley location, I think, is relatively the same, but the tornadoes have even been getting more powerful in the Midwest as well. So, it's almost like it's a global thing. But my few environmental science classes and not much else education, I remain pretty optimistic that Boulder would be a smart enough place to kind of make some infrastructure upgrades. I'm talking about CU South and the kind of floodplain impacts that might happen there. I'm hoping that there's a decent amount of kind of future proofing that we'll see, and also we talk a lot about like fire risk mitigation. I think that'll just continue. But yeah, I think going forwards, that's going to be top of mind for a lot more people. Yeah.
Radical agreement. But before we go further into that topic, let me just wrap up this thing with Asheville and the discrepancy between climate risk scoring and reality on the ground. And the Washington Post had this article, and we'll put that link in the show notes as well. The title of the article is "Before the Floods, Asheville Was Called a Climate Haven. Is Anywhere Safe?" And I'll just read the quick first paragraph. Asheville, North Carolina seemed like an ideal place to escape the worst effects of global warming. In recent years, media outlets and real estate agents, of course they throw us under the bus, media outlets and real estate agents named the city a climate haven because of its cooler than normal temps in the south and a location far inland from the flooding pummeled coasts. Last year, the Asheville Citizen-Times reported on worries that the city would become overcrowded from climate change migration. Then the flooding came, right? So, I mean, is it worth 2 cents, the risk score? I think that you have to look at things much more independently than the overall risk assessment put out by a model. And this is where we're going to go into hardening, and that's what you were about to bring up, Hamish. Mm-hmm. And that's what you may not know is that there are now local fire hardening grants available. And you can get that if you happen to own a home that is within the zone that officials have identified as the highest risk. So if you go to this article, and we'll put the link in the show notes as well about this $1,000 fire proofing grant. It's really not proofing anything, it's hardening. There's a link in there to a map, and that Wildfire Resilience Assistance Program, or WRAP, will reimburse you up to $1,000 for doing certain things to make your home less fire prone. And no surprise, all of those areas on the map are the very western edge of the city of Boulder, and then it wraps around what you were about talking about, CU South, which is sort of strange because CU South is going to, right now it looks like a big tinderbox of empty space, of open space. I mean, look, it's lovely and people use it for exercise and recreation, but it's recovering gravel pits. Okay, that's what CU South currently is. It's going to be landscaped and buildings and irrigated within the next probably 5 years because CU is going to invest an enormous amount of money there. So I don't know why they needed to make that little wrap around Tantra Park to include that in this WRAP program. Yeah, given what's going to happen with CU South, that seemed like I mean, look, I'm happy for those people. There's probably 20 houses that now have $1,000, giveaway from Boulder. But this is actually money well spent. Okay, anything we can do to harden homes that are more fire prone, more at risk, is important to do. And there are all sorts of little and big things people can do to harden their property.
Yeah, and I hear kind of the pessimist going, well, too little, too late. Well, it's something, and I'm just happy with something at this rate,
It's hard not to be a pessimist when you see how our government spends money. And this is, an aside, and we have many friends that work for the city that are in politics for the city and in the county. But it's really, I'm sorry, I can't stop talking about it. It just frustrates the hell out of me. Like, we're about to spend hundreds of millions of dollars more on alpine balsam, but no one's hitting the brakes because there's a commercial real estate collapse. Mm-hmm. And you suddenly can buy commercial buildings for a fraction of what they were selling for 3 years ago. And yet we're about to, embark on a giant building project. Maybe we should hold off and reassess our needs for office space before the situation has changed, and there's an opportunity right now to potentially pick up very cheap commercial real estate where people could have their office, if we really need offices, instead of investing so much money in alpine balsam. But yeah, that's the disheartening thing about how government spends money, and I'm obviously outing myself as a fiscal conservative.
We're all shocked.
Shocking. Crazy liberal when it comes to social matters. I'm going to put that out front now that we're talking about my politics.
You brought it up, man.
But also absurdly conservative when it goes to how our government spends money. And I don't know how you can't be, given what's happening with de-dollarization and inflation out of control and printing of money out of control globally.
As for me, listener, you'll never know.
Yeah, you'll never know, Hamish. I'm just trying to influence him as much as possible to adopt the correct way to think about these things. One, don't pick a party. Two,
the correct way.
You'll get there. You'll get there, Hamish. Right?
No, it's...
there's that old saying, if you're not a liberal when you're young, you have no heart. But if you're not a conservative when you're older, you have no brain.
Yeah. I remember the first time I heard that being like, okay, well, I'm young now, but we'll see,
Okay, we'll see how you change over time, Hamish. Yeah. The only thing I'm conservative about is how our government spends money. So those two articles I think are really important to look at, and I do want to give a shout out to Boulder Reporting Lab for their excellent coverage on local topics that we're not seeing anywhere else, particularly in the Daily Camera. But what we did see this week was a new article in the Camera talking about the new modular home factory that is set to open. And this is something you may not know. We've talked about it before in the podcast, and we're going to go into a little more detail. So I think this was about 7 years ago. The city of Boulder purchased the Ponderosa, what's the word? It's not, are we allowed to say trailer park?
I think so.
Okay, so it's
mobile
a trailer
home park.
Mobile home park is probably a better term. It's a pocket of Boulder that is on the northwest side of town, and it is behind Red's liquor store and where Bimoka is going in. It's basically the corner of Violet and Broadway, the west side of that. The city acquired this mobile home park, and the park had been full of homes that had been modified. Some looked like they weren't done with a permit. I mean, it really was kind of the Wild West. These roads were dirt. Like, the owner did not invest money. And these are some of the least fortunate and poorer members of our community that have been living there. And so the city is working on replacing many of those homes with new modular homes that they're going to build in this factory. And these homes will be far better designed, will be energy efficient. And there's a great little article in the Daily Camera, and that link is in the show notes, about the ribbon cutting that's coming up for this factory. And of course, it wouldn't be Boulder if there wasn't some sort of protest. And for sure, people that are behind this factory or close to this factory, including some of our clients and friends, were not particularly thrilled to see this get built. But it's a done deal. And there is a need for it, and for sure, what's going to be built is going to be many times better than what exists in these mobile home parks. And there's a bunch of mobile home parks in Boulder that potentially could benefit. Yeah. So the factory is supposed to be capable of making up to 50 houses a year, but in the first few years is likely only going to produce 12 to 15 houses a year. And so that's exciting news to see. Investment in the North Boulder sub-community, which is very close to our office. And it's also nice to see the city invest in improving the housing in these mobile home parks. And it's a difficult problem to solve because typically the mobile home parks are privately owned. And one of the ways that the city has prevented these parcels of land from becoming redeveloped with luxury homes is to either acquire it or to zone it, rezone it in such a way that the owner can't do anything. They're locked in amber. And so then what happens is it becomes, a cash cow rent collection for the landlord, who then invests nothing in the infrastructure. And there have been so many horrible stories about infrastructure breaking down in these communities. And these people, typically, they don't own the land. They just own the 1970s era mobile home on top. Yeah. It's sort of a disaster. So it's really nice to see the city do something and try to solve this problem. And it may not be the most optimal solution, but it is a solution. And we'll see how it goes. And I'm cautiously optimistic that it'll be something that improves the whole community and not just a few select people, or not just a couple of partners for the city that seem to always be the partners for the city when it comes to development.
Credit where it's due. tentatively.
I mean, howdy, Coburn. I don't know what else to say. Like, the Coburn and Boulder Housing Partners are always the partners for the city, and it would not surprise me if there's something weird going on there. And do I have the time to, like, launch investigative journalism? No,
we will
I'm not
have
a
carve out for that later.
This is just, hey, Boulder Open Reporting or Boulder Reporting Lab. Here's an article for you.
Column. Yeah.
Why is Coburn and Boulder Housing Partners always the developer of choice?
Well, Boulder Housing Partners has Boulder in the name, so that's kind of pretty self-explanatory there.
It sounds like it's a public entity, but guess what? It ain't.
There's this federal entity that sounds like it's public too, isn't there? Anyway.
I don't know where you're going with that conspiracy. Are we headed to the deep state next? What's happening? Boulder, does Boulder have a deep state? We'll
that's a good one.
Out.
Yeah.
And then we'll find out that I'm going to get investigated by every city employee is going to go after me personally for even suggesting it.
Osmond is in good health and has a positive outlook on life. For the record.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. And like I just said, I like city employees. Please don't come after me. All right, so let's hit the last in the news topic, and that is, this combined in the news, what you don't know. This Sunday is Meet the Spirits. So Historic Boulder, which is an organization for which I am a member. I'm not on the board. I'm just a member. And I really have been enjoying their events. Their events are really deeply educational. They're so well done. They're done by people that deeply care about this community. And I'm impressed. After many years of being on the sidelines and thinking maybe I'm not the right fit for Historic Boulder, I realized actually I think I might be the right fit for Historic Boulder. I really like this organization, and their events have been so fun. And they're doing one this Sunday. So they do this every year. They do an event called Meet the Spirits, and they get volunteers to portray people that have passed and are often buried in the city of Boulder. I think they also did one up in Gold Hill a few years ago that I attended. And so we're going to go to the one on Sunday. I encourage you to go as well. And you can check out Historic Boulder's website and buy tickets online. There are limits to the number of tickets. It's a great family event. The actors are all volunteers. They're doing a great job. And the cemetery is, I think, the Pioneer Cemetery off of 9th Street. And it is coming up this Sunday from 12 to 4. That's a free promo, Historic Boulder. I think you should...
non-spawn.
You should sign up for the podcast or sign up for our newsletter. But yeah, check out Historic Boulder and check out the Meet the Spirits event. It's a lot of fun for the whole family.
Yeah. I'm excited. I'm planning to go with you this year, but I've seen it, for the past 3 years and thought it'd be fun to do. So,
yep.
Well,
so let's hit market conditions, and then we'll do our shameless self-promotion segment, and then we'll do sales of the week, and then we'll wrap up with our little carve-outs. We've got a few more things to hit. So market conditions, what to expect in 2025. We had a really good team meeting this week, and the consensus is that market activity for the city of Boulder has been depressed now for 2 years, and inventory has grown, but the need for people to buy and sell real estate has not fundamentally shifted, meaning that people have a consistent need over time. It's not something you can delay indefinitely. So even though inventory is growing, people are adding more inventory, and there's a really good chance rates are going to be dramatically lower. I would like to see them start with a 5 before we really see a pickup, but I think that we're going to see a bit of a pickup at the beginning of the year. And companies like House Einstein that have a very different business model from the Compasses and the Coldwell Bankers and the Remaxes of the world, we are radically different in how we approach what we do, in that our focus is helping people make smart decisions, not just sell them on something with a shiny brand wrapper around us. We are much more in the world of advising, not in the world of salesy and pushiness. Yeah. And so what's happening is, and this is going to segue here into whether buyer agency agreements are required or not, and the settlement from the National Association, and how that's impacting the market in unexpected ways. So what's happening is that you used to be able to click a button and schedule a showing, and you could still do that, but what happens is the agent that meets you is going to ask you to sign an agreement for how they're going to get paid. And that agreement may be exclusive to that house. The agent might try to lop you into a 1-year agreement. This is somebody you don't know, somebody you haven't researched, but they made it so easy to schedule a showing. But now you can't go into the house unless you sign this agreement.
And
that commits you to
any
using
agent now.
Any agent. If they're using the MLS here in Colorado, the MLS is controlled by the association. You don't have to be a member of our 2 local Front Range associations. I don't know about Colorado Springs, but I do know about the association controlled MLS in Denver, and the one here that is Boulder and Fort Collins. And they require you to adhere to their rules, although you no longer have to be a member. And those rules say that you need to have a buyer agency agreement in order to show a house, unless you are the listing agent at an open house. And part of this was to help people have transparency over how their agent was getting paid, in particular in states that didn't have buyer agency. Colorado has had buyer agency for at least 22 or 23 years, maybe a lot longer. So it's not necessarily a new way of doing business for Colorado, except for this necessity of having this agreement in place from the very first showing. So how do you get to know your agent? How do you know? I mean, look, we're not the only game in town. There's some great agents out there. There's a lot of really bad agents. You need to shop around and go see some homes with these people before you commit yourself to working with them. But now, well, you can't unless you have to commit to them to even see a single house. So that is a dramatic shift. And we noticed a huge uptick at our open houses. So open houses are something that I felt had very mixed feelings about for a long time. And we've started doing them again because we were getting amazing attendance at these open houses. And in addition to being able to present the home and answer questions, we also have buyers that want to talk to us about buyer agency. So there's a double benefit from hosting these open houses. So we'll be doing 2 of them, maybe 3 of them this weekend, actually.
Yep. In the winter season. Or not winter season, but late season.
This is the slow season. So what should you expect in 2025? Well, if rates are in the 5s, I think we're going to have a market that is on fire. I think that the government's going to continue to spend money like drunken sailors, and we're going to continue to see inflation. So real estate is the classic inflation hedge. How long you sit on the sidelines and not get invested in real estate is always an individual choice. But you may want to think about that if you're just entering the market for the first time. Maybe you're moving here from another market. You may not want to rent for very long because you're likely going to see prices rise dramatically higher, or at least you should factor that into your decision-making process. I'm not pushing you to buy. We have plenty of clients, and we represent plenty of clients. I'm very happy to have that business. We don't need to go out there beat the drum for more. But I think that agents like those that take fiduciary responsibility seriously and can communicate their systems to express that fiduciary responsibility to help their clients with due diligence, which is not a duty of a real estate agent to a buyer, but something that we do. Those agents that can do that really effectively are going to be really busy. And that's the conclusion we reached for 2025 first quarter, is we're going to be really busy. And we need to have our systems ready for a pretty dramatic expansion. And buyers and sellers, you're going to be navigating a completely different world where commission conversations are going to be happening up front. You may have to commit to using agents without even knowing if they're good or not. And you may have to do a lot more work to decide who you want to use before you just click a button and see a house. Click a button and see a house is probably the absolute worst way to get to know an agent. You have no idea who you're dealing with.
I'll say, it sounds more relevant than ever to pitch one of our earlier podcasts, which is questions to ask your agent when you're shopping your agent. And
let's throw that in the show notes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That'll be in the description.
Yeah. Ask tough questions. And don't trust the feedback on Zillow or Google Maps or anywhere else.
As much as we'd like you to trust ours, yeah.
Well, no, we have 5-star feedback, and we make sure we serve our clients to a very high level to maintain that. But the feedback is not the same as knowing that, like, the person has to, in order to give good feedback, they need a reference to having dealt with some agents that are good, some agents that are bad, and most people buy a house every 7 years, they don't know the difference between a good agent and a bad agent. You have to ask tough questions, and you have to make sure that this person feels like is an honest broker and somebody you trust when it comes time to making difficult decisions in negotiations, in property selection, in due diligence, and getting their list of recommended contractors. All those things matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you really do need to interview these agents at this rate. And one of the things, I saw kind of a little video on this pre-showing agency agreement, is to more look at it kind of like it's, you sign your waiver before you go to the dentist, or you sign your waiver before you go to the doctor. It's kind of like here's the relationship for, the set amount of time just to get in the house type of deal. But it's a really interesting one, and I think I'm almost bummed to see this change roll out, considering Colorado's been so on top of things as it has been. But I think it's pretty navigable. It's just new.
I think it'll be fine, but it's clearly causing a disruption in the marketplace right now. And there's a lot of agents that don't really know what to do. For sure, a lot of agents are going to get out of the business. And if I could share one particular life lesson that I don't think I covered in that first or earlier podcast, and that is, be sure you're working with people that have integrity. I had a really nice dinner, just drinks last night with a good friend, and we were having a pretty in-depth conversation about the things that both of us have experienced in our professional career. We're very close to the same age. And he brought up integrity. And I can't agree with him more as one of the key distinctions between people you want to work with and people you really should avoid. And character goes hand in hand with integrity, and it's challenging to suss out because people will tell you what they think you want to hear, and real estate is full of good salespeople that will tell you what you want to hear, but that's not actually how they operate. And sometimes you just want to believe what you're being told, and it turns out the person is opposite of what they say they are. And so this is what's also a dead giveaway, is the more they harp on it, more often than not that they're the opposite of what they think or what they want you to believe. And that could be so infuriating. So you may want to consider signing up for a shorter agreement as a test drive. And I would sign up for that too. Let's go meet and go see 6 houses over the course of a weekend. And if after that experience you want to break up with me, that's great. Let's break up. We're done. I invested 6 houses. It's not a good fit for either of us. Those are negotiable. It's a way to test drive your agent, but it's not about the houses. It's about this person.
The working relationship.
Yeah. 100%. So expect 2025 to be an interesting start to the year. I think there's going to be a lot more buyers and sellers in the market. And for now, you do need this buyer agency agreement. And we're going to put a link to Jonathan Goodman's video, who is an attorney who advises Colorado real estate agents. He is always full of good info, and he can go into much more detail. And one way to avoid the buyer agency is to call the listing agent and work with the seller's agent directly. You will not be represented. Another way to do it is to just go to an open house and then bring your agent aboard to negotiate a deal for you. And the third option is to negotiate with these agents over the length of the buyer agency, the ways you can exit a buyer agency, and of course commissions too. And I will add that commissions are negotiable, but you're going to start seeing a lot of shenanigans in the market where because buyers and sellers don't know, but agents do. And that's a dangerous mismatch in information when you have certain people that are going to tell you that no, buyers agents get 3.5%, and when they really don't. And how are you going to know the difference? I mean, that
call around, shop, get different opinions,
of quality people. Not of people
quality.
Of quality.
I mean, we can't.
People.
I can't bring up brokerage names or anything, right? That ruins my joke. But it's good to stay safe on the podcast.
Stay safe.
Yeah. Yeah, you too, listener.
Okay. Well, the principle there, Hamish, is that if we're criticizing a brokerage or an agent, we do so by category.
Right.
And if we are praising them, we do so by name.
Yeah.
And I prefer to keep it that way. So
that's why I'm no more said. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, I will loop in like the big bulge bracket brokerages with national presence. I feel like I'm not attacking like boxes. A little mom and pop when I talk about the stock performance of Compass, right, as an indicator of their value. I think that just is what it is. Anyway, okay, so let's move on.
I think that was a productive segment. I don't know how I'm going to split that in the time codes because I think it wove so well together. But I think that was a productive one.
Well, I mean, you may need to just readjust the time code or the table of contents, rewrite it.
Yeah.
But let's move on to some other things to think about. And this is going to be a little bit of education for sellers and a little bit of also shameless self-promotion. So it kind of fits both. And one of the things we began doing about a year ago was to up our game with feedback. So rather than waiting for agents to respond to the automated feedback, we have started texting and calling agents. And for example, at our listing at Knox Drive, it's had a bunch of showings, and only one of those agents we have not gotten feedback from. Mm-hmm. Not every agent has provided great feedback, including agents that have well-known names, sometimes have zero to offer their colleagues. And that's sort of disappointing. But sometimes agents I haven't heard from offer really good feedback. So we try to put those reports together at least once a week for our sellers, and they are time consuming, but they really add value because it's not just our opinion on price, it's not just our opinion on the staging or the need to paint the interior. You're now getting that from the market, and we knew it in advance, we told you in advance, and now here's the confirmation from the buyer's agents as well, and sometimes it can be hard for people to hear it, right? Like my own parents, they're selling their house, and I've been trying to get them to declutter it, and they're making progress, and I love them to pieces, but the way I told them to do it was to, get it done in 2 weeks. Get a dumpster, anything you're keeping, keep, but keep it off site, and everything else goes. And they looked at me like I was crazy, and they absolutely refused to do it, and
didn't want to hear
it. Yeah, they didn't want to hear it. And so sometimes it takes a while for that reality to come to bear. But it happens. Eventually, Mr. Market wins in the end, and it's either a much lower price or you will have to do the work needed to get your house sold.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's I really like it, and occasionally, we find the opportunity to reach out to an agent before they even see the place, and having that report ready has been handy. I've been able to answer a few real-time questions while the agent's at the showing, or help, where I wouldn't otherwise be able to. So it's a nice little get ahead of things.
It also gives us an opportunity to pitch it, right? Like they may not know about certain aspects of it. They just scheduled the showing without doing any research. And now you can talk about the Tesla roof. You can talk about the fact it's south-facing. And, make sure you point out this one's south-facing, and none of the competitors are southfacing. And if your client's ever going to pop the top, this makes a huge difference, and you should know about it. So feedback is vital when we're in a market that is becoming more balanced, and sellers have to work a little harder on getting their listing sold. So let's talk about our brand new listing this week.
Yes. It's not yet active as we record, but it will be as it's released. Shanahan Ridge
podcast.
Yeah.
As this podcast is released.
Yep. Shanahan Ridge. That's the name of the area?
You seem confused, Hamish.
I'm just double checking.
It is the name of the area. It is part of Table Mesa. It is the the southwest corner of Table Mesa. And I learned that when it was being developed, people protested. There were protests over that development. I learned that from one of the neighbors. Can you believe that? In the 70s. And it is such an amazing location. So in the 70s, they built a bunch of townhomes up there. and they're reasonably spaced apart. Today, they would be built on top of each other to such an extent it would not look anything like this. This is much more spacious and takes into account that need for separation between units. Our particular listing has one shared wall, and according to the owner, they never hear the person, or almost never hear the person on the other side. It's so rare, it's unexpected when it does happen. And the owners of this particular unit, 3707 Telluride, it will be on the market. Should be available probably tomorrow, but maybe Friday when this goes live. They invested money in terms of adding an air conditioning system, mini splits. The kitchen's been remodeled. The property has bamboo flooring. The bathroom's been remodeled. It's really a lovely spot, and it has the critical first floor, main level, primary bedroom, and main level patios that allow for dog ownership. It's way easier if you could just let your dog out in this little patio area that's enclosed. So there's so many reasons, but most importantly, it's that access to world-class open space.
Oh, no kidding.
Thousands of acres through Shanahan Ridge, up to Bear Peak, behind NCAR, on the Mesa Trail, all the way to Chautauqua if you want, or further. I mean, it is so well connected to incredible South Boulder open space. And 3 years ago, there were bidding wars all day long for these, and they were selling at insane premiums. People were skipping inspections and writing offers at 50, 100,000 over list. And this particular style with the one-car garage as well, 3 bedrooms total, just checks so many boxes for so many different buyers. And these owners did a great job of taking care of this one. So I almost wanted to buy it as an investment, but again, I'm trying to diversify a little bit. This one I would say it's easily top 10% of what you find up in Shanahan Ridge, easily.
Yeah, it's a super functional layout too. I don't know what what was in the water with the developers around that time, but it's just a really nice layout. They are kind of fun with some vaulted ceilings, which is nice to look at versus a box, and there's some good skylights and some nice natural light. It's a really cool kind of unit. Had a lot of fun shooting it and being in that space.
Well, I looked at one of the competitors because that's what you do when you price a listing, or
that's what you
should do. And I previewed the competitor, and while I was previewing it, met the neighbor who was watering the patio area, and she's the one that told me about the protests in the 70s. She said she was there protesting. She was probably in her 20s. This was an older lady, a senior lady, and she said that there used to be a pool up there and a whole bunch of other things that the neighborhood got to use, and then it got redeveloped. So that's what they were protesting, was the loss of those things. And then she laughed and goes, and then later I bought a unit and I've been living here for like 30 years.
What are you gonna do?
Like,
I mean, it's a great spot.
Yeah. You protested it, and then you bought a unit up there. I got it.
What?
So that's 3707 Shanahan, Telluride Circle on Shanahan Ridge.
Yeah, stay posted for that. The listing video is also going to be in the description below. It's going to be a link-filled description, this podcast.
Yeah. And one of the things I find really funny about our video game is, one, I'm fairly convinced our videos are top 5% of the competition. We are completely benchmarked, if not better than the top agents in town. But none of them are spending any money on, once they'll spend thousands on the video, but then they won't actually.
I see very few
boost it.
Do something with it. Yeah.
There's no views. It's completely being done to placate the seller and make it look like they did something. But who cares if the video is amazing if nobody sees it?
And that
great.
It's like the boosting part of it's easier than the video filming part of it, but that's fine.
I mean, look, it's fine by me if they're too dumb to advertise it. I don't know what to say. Like,
be our guest.
The machine makes money on advertising, and if you want your content to be seen, you have to spend money to get it seen. I'm sorry, that's especially, it's a listing video, right? It's not It's not Mr. Beast. It's a listing video.
If only. No, he's in controversy now.
Is he?
We'll see how that shakes. Oh yeah. We'll see how that shakes out. Topic for another Carveout later down. Yeah.
Well, maybe we should carve out, because I think we've hit everything. We've shamelessly. We haven't done sales of the week. Yep. Oh, sales of the week.
For shame.
All right, for shame. I don't know. The carve-outs just seem like so much fun.
I
I love
know.
talking about real estate. Look, I love real estate. This is what I do professionally. And I'm so grateful for all the clients and friends I've met over 21 years. But after you've been doing something for 20 years, you kind of just want to talk about random things and not talk about real estate.
And Osmond and I, we don't go for a beer after work. This is, well, the carve-outs are the closest, so...
That's a good point, Hamish. Maybe we should at least once a week do something social. I forgot it. We tried to do it.
Keep talking about it. Yeah, we got to get back to it.
All right.
We'll
all
figure
right.
it out.
Well, maybe after the Meet the Spirits on Sunday.
We'll figure it out. Definitely.
All right. So let's talk about sales of the week.
Yes. I have a few here. I'll leave it to you to pick the order.
Well, let's go most expensive to least expensive.
Perfect.
And there are people that just love an expensive house. And this is a really interesting sale. So 633 College Avenue. Go ahead and onto Realtor.com or Zillow and pull it up. Click the link in the show description so you can follow along. So this house was built in 2019. Probably was a home that was completely reconstructed. Let me just check really quick. So sometimes agents will use the effective year built instead of the actual year built because the home has been so modified. And in this particular case, both the effective and the year built is 2016, although the listing says 2019. So, all right, well, the takeaway on that is, one, it probably is an older foundation, and two, you should always review the permits. And you may want to do that after you're under contract, so you've locked it down. And in this particular case, this was a deal that was really unusual for a couple of reasons. So it was sold pre-market, meaning that the listing agent, or I should say one of the two listing agents, represented the buy side as well. So likely earned both sides of the commission, maybe at a discounted rate. That's certainly what we do if the buyer is unrepresented. We discount our commission. We do more work, but we also discount our commission. And the story is even more complicated. So I guess we're talking about the story with the agents. It's disclosed that the seller was also a licensed real estate broker in the state of Colorado. And we don't know which of the sellers were that person. Their address for tax purposes is here in Boulder. I've never heard their names before. It's possible they just had a license but don't do much with it. And so they preferred to have professional representation. And certainly they chose some very well-known agents, no argument about that. But they chose two agents from two different brokerages. And then one of the brokers double-ended, which is just, head-scratchingly complex. And I've seen how this works in other markets when we were one of many agents that were co-listing, and it didn't work out very well. In this particular case, the property did sell immediately. The question, of course, is did they leave money on the table or did they get fair value? And that's for a deep dive into the comps. And also a consultation maybe with your spiritual advisor. It was listed at 4.3. It sold for 3.98. It was on the market 0 days, meaning that a buyer showed up before it even was activated, and that buyer did close 35 days later. They likely had a full inspection. They did pay cash for the property. And it's a mid-century design home, and supposedly had been in Dwell and Modern Magazine, which apparently you could pay to be in Dwell. I didn't realize that was a thing, but
that's all you have to do. Just pay.
Well, I learned that this year when I was told by a potential seller that they were going to use another brokerage because that other broker was paying to have their house in Dwell. And I thought, wait a minute, I thought homes in Dwell were chosen for their architectural significance. And no, it turns out it's just another one of these trade rags that sells everything. And they just don't have to disclose that that's paid advertising. But this house itself is gorgeous, okay? There's no argument, and it's really nicely photographed. It's beautifully designed. It's a decent square footage. Checks so many boxes in terms of its design. Had 10 bedrooms, 4,200 square feet. I kind of wonder if they're counting a bunch of offices as bedrooms just to show you how many rooms it had, but that's fine. Obviously, whether it's a bedroom or not when you walk in the door. It had an ADU, which was part of that bedroom count. That was a licensed ADU. Maybe it's possibilities for a rental unit, but likely it was licensed.
Which home is this?
We're talking about 633 College.
Okay, still, yeah, I don't see the ADU.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. So it was a basement ADU, not a separate structure.
Okay.
So big lot, 25,000 square feet and a 4,200 square foot house. So reasonable sized house on a big lot, south facing, west of 9th Street. So generally College Avenue, east of 9th Street is a student infested disaster. You're going to see a lot of drunk kids walking back and forth, and I'm being hesitant on my language because we love the students, but they're very likely going to be damaging your car if it's parked on the street on College Avenue after a football game. But if you're west of 9th Street, or otherwise, well, if you're west of 9th Street, it's not so bad. It starts to thin out, and you don't have nearly the student density. And this is basically just north of Rose Hill, which is one of my favorite neighborhoods. I mean, it's a great spot. And it looks like the house is set far enough back from the road. And, of course, with that big of a lot, I mean, you've got plenty of space to spread out.
Mm. Yeah, it's a pretty home. I really like that one room where it's just kind of wrapped in windows. It almost looks like a dentist's waiting room. But I just love the wrapped in windows look. Kind of that treetop feel.
I've never heard dentist waiting room as a positive plus before.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you love your dentist or your dental experience, I'm gonna look at the photos a little more closely now because I'm seeing. Does this remind me of my dentist? I need to schedule.
It's the only thing is just those two chairs with the coffee table. Maybe it's like a chatting room or something. But I really like the wraparound windows. That's gorgeous.
Yeah, and everything's current. There's not a thing in this home that's not current, including every fixture is that sort of slightly bronzy tinge. All the mirrors in the bathrooms are backlit. I mean, it just looks gorgeous. And I suspect, the professional photography is spot on. The color grade is really consistent. It has a little bit of a vintage tone to it, which is now the look. I even love that back patio. I mean, there's so much about this property that's cool.
It's just a pleasing home, yeah.
And I think it's across from the street from a house that had been on the market for a long, long time and didn't sell that we looked at least 2 or 3 times. That's pretty funny. Well, there you have it. So that is this listing, and a curious backstory with regard to why there were 2 agents involved, why the seller, who themselves was a listing agent, was a licensed broker, why they didn't sell it themselves. I mean, there's definitely something to be said for outside professional advice. And the agents they chose are great agents, but they're also from different brokerages, which that's a complex relationship to navigate. It'd be like, look, we get along with our colleagues, but we almost never co-list something across brokerages.
Yeah, it's really unusual to see.
Yeah, and then one of them double ends to add even more complexity. Okay, let's move on.
They're having a good day. All right.
95 South 32nd Street. So this is a Martin Acres pop top. It's on one of the quietest streets in Martin Acres. So if you look at Martin Acres, Martin Acres is bounded by Broadway and it's bounded by US 36. So it does get a bunch of traffic noise, but 32nd, 33rd, 34th, 35th, and 36th Street between Martin Drive and, say, Dartmouth, that is the quietest part of the neighborhood. In my subjective opinion, it's one of the nicest parts of Martin Acres. And we used to walk by this house all the time and talk about its design and architecture. When it was done, I can't remember when the permits were pulled, but it was so stunningly beautiful. And I believe the owners had actually... were architects. I might be confusing a different house. I'm going on memory on that one. But whoever did the design work killed it. And it stood the test of time. If you look at the backyard, I mean, it has this little courtyard feel to it, upper level deck. And then the Southwest inspired design without going Adobe, which you really shouldn't do, is really stunning.
Did you say without going Adobe?
That Adobe coloration, actual Adobe is probably... not what you want to do. This looks like American clay finish on the inside. Nice transom windows.
I was going to ask all of this. That's good to know. Yeah.
Everything about this house is just beautiful. And I think this house, Halloween is coming up. I'm pretty sure this is also the house that has the little coven of witches that they put in the front yard, like little decorative coven of witches, which is really cute and funny. It might be the neighbor's house that does it, but it's right on the street. So awesome property, and I believe it is setting a record for where you can sell these two-story homes that were originally built in the 50s and then completely transformed with a second-story addition. And this property was listed at 1.625, and
Wow.
it sold for 1.62. It was available for less than a week. It was off. It was totally closed out 37 days after hitting the market. Outside agent that represented the buy side, so independence between buy and sell. I mean, all of this house if you're buying a Martin Acres pop top, this is easily top 10% of options, this home. And I had not seen it on the market before. I haven't actually looked to see how many times it's traded over the years. I don't think many, having lived in the neighborhood for a significant number of years of my life. It looks like this particular, well, it might have a complex backstory, because it looks like the seller acquired it in 2005, and then there was a quit claim to a different person in 2023. And usually when you see a quit claim like that, it's part of like a divorce or something like that is what happened. So the ownership transferred from one person to another, and then this person who got the house in 2023 sold it for 1.6, and it's an amazing property. So I will check the records to see it, but just looking at 1.6 as a number and having tracked this neighborhood for so many years, I'm fairly confident that it sets a record for this size of a house in Martin Acres.
Yeah, very understated from the front of the street too. I like that a lot.
And that's another reason to look at it, is from a design perspective. When you're looking at these little basic ranches in Martin Acres or anywhere in South Boulder, these kind of 1,200 square foot house, what can you do with it? And this is an example of just how much you can do with it. It is just unreal how nice this house is. And you think about that little kind of salt box house from the 50s, and then how it turned into this.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a Martin Acres ranch, but it's a very similar ranch design, and yeah, one can dream.
Well, one can dream, but one can also do the math, right? If you spend $800 buying a basic Martin Acres ranch on one of these prime streets, and then you spend another $500,000, $700,000 investing in redeveloping the entire property, and the numbers are going to be high because that's Boulder, right? We're talking 500 a square-ish numbers. Is your capital preserved? I think that if you design it well, like these people did, you're not really spending the money. You're investing that capital for your own personal
inflation hedge
use, and when you do sell it, it holds its value. Like you did not throw that money away.
Yeah, I think you're dead on. We're at our last one, so I think we'll be good for time. Yep, we're nailing it.
Well, I mean, we're trying to be an hour and a half. I think we'll do it. We'll see. So this last one, sale of the week, our third sale of the week and final sale of the week, is 540 Mohawk Drive, Unit 9. And 540 Mohawk, Unit 9 is part of Meadows on the Parkway. And I have listed 2 properties and sold them in this development in my career. And I've represented buyers as well. And the basic investment thesis is that these units that were built in the late 90s have a far better layout and flow than most of the options for 2-bedroom condos in Boulder. The student density is also really low. So you have newer design, fewer students, and often it's young professionals that gravitate toward this as a first home purchase. The location is not particularly amazing. You're sort of tucked behind the Meadows Shopping Center. That's the shopping center at Baseline and Foothills that's got, Safeway, it's got a liquor store, a bunch of different restaurants, but it doesn't feel as particularly high end as some of the other shopping centers. I do like it. Like we do go to McDevitt's there. In fact, I think I put that on my social media recently. Like there's a lot to like about it. There's a library there, and Thunderbird Lake is a nice little evening walk to the south. So there's that going on. But the entry always feels like you're driving behind a shopping plaza to get to to your home. So the curb appeal is somewhat lacking. But in any event, it's a very affordable option. And this particular unit was listed and sold within the course of several weeks by the listing agent. Did not have a buy-side representation on the deal. Sold for $560, listed for $560. And interestingly enough, this particular agent helped the seller acquire the property only 6 months earlier. And it's not clear why they only owned it for 6 months. And it's, they actually sold it for $15,000 more than they paid for it in a market that is increasingly saturated with competition. So there's all sorts. It only takes one buyer, right, to decide that they're going to pay $560. It's what they want. They flew into town this weekend. It checks the boxes, et cetera, et cetera. Like, they're not going to negotiate over $15,000 when there aren't better options in this price point. But my first look at this was like, wow, the guy listed and double-ended, and this guy also represented the buyer when they acquired it originally, and it was only a 6-month hold. Like, what's the backstory? Oh, and by the way, they're not even local into our market. They're an agent from outside of town. And so that all was like tingling red flags for me when I first looked at this unit, particularly because they don't always sell right away. Sometimes they are on the market for a while. And there's nothing nefarious that I could see. Like, the deal is right in the middle of the comps, so the price point looks fine. I think that the seller got lucky. And it is an attractive unit, and it is one to know about if you're thinking about shopping in Boulder. They do come up a couple times a year, and they're worth looking at just so you understand the options. I would not buy a garden level unit. I think that they feel dark. Actually, you can't really get garden level. It's first floor, because the garden level is really the underground parking. But even the first floor level is really not ideal. You want to be on the upper level. It just has far better light. Feels much nicer. You don't have somebody living above you walking around that conducts through the structure. You won't hear that if you're on the upper level, and that's what this one is. And I have this memory of corner units being better than middle units, but I don't think this was a corner unit, and I have to verify by going to visit myself. Oh yeah, there's a little community center, and that's nice, but and a lot of attached dwellings don't have that. That is a selling point for this particular development.
I'm noticing,
and that's how the cookie crumbled.
Yeah, they included the inspection report in the MLS link, so that was interesting.
Yeah, that's a little unusual.
I'd say if you're trying to move a house after having it 6 months prior, maybe it is best to have all your stuff up front, right?
Yeah, we do recommend it. We do think it's a good idea that sellers pre-inspect. In fact, if you're a listing agent, I'll pay for it because it does increase trust and transparency. But it isn't necessarily a great idea to put that on the MLS because you're kind of showing people an invasive report on the property before they've even walked in. And that, people buy it on emotions typically.
Exactly. So
it can backfire.
Yeah. Looking at it through a computer screen, you can be cold and calculated. But when you're in there in person, you're more likely to make some concessions here or there.
It's sort of like dating. I haven't been dating in a long time, but it's sort of like getting the medical history of the person before you've even had a first date. Like,
get the HIPAA release.
Finding out, their student loan status and what their income is. Like, what are their family obligations?
Yeah. Credit score, background check.
How do they respond to stress? Like, it just feels like it's too fast. Like, there's an order of operations, and we have discussions over whether it makes sense or not to do inspection reports. And in many cases, it does. This one did. Anyway, it's a very interesting sale. It's a good data point for those shopping in the market that want at least 2 bedrooms, a functional layout, not far from CU, underground parking, and a complex that's right next to the grocery store and a bunch of restaurants. Like, if you're putting Junior into an apartment for the year, and you don't want to keep paying the slumlords in Boulder, this is a great option because it's not where the students party, and they're super functional layouts. They're very nice units for what they are.
Yeah, super. Yeah, and underbuilding parking is fantastic too. Yeah.
Can we now talk? It was fun to talk about $500,000 condos, but can we do the Carveout section?
Osman, where were you?
No, I want to hear where you were. I think you talked about it briefly, but I don't think you really talked about road tripping.
Yeah, I
feel like
didn't necessarily feel like, I don't know, a car adventure would be too interesting. But yeah, I have a old 91 BMW that a 3 Series 318 IS that I put a V8 into, and did that back in 2020, and kind of just wouldn't stop talking about it to my brother. He's out in North Carolina, and I'd go out there for a wedding and, just to see them and everything, but we kept talking about this car, and I'm like, well, at some point I've got to get out there and show him in person. Not to mention, we're up here at altitude, and I always hear that the cars are faster down at sea level, but I wanted to experience it, and I wanted to do it in something that I had experience with already. Like, I know how that car drives. And I made it down there. No hiccup, really. I hit a piece of road debris, and it crushed an O2 sensor, so I had to diagnose that and then replace an O2 sensor while I was in Illinois. Took kind of a wider route around. But that was about it. I finally figured out mileage because the odometer doesn't work. I used the mile tracking app and then tracked my fuel receipts, and I'm getting about 19 mpg up here at altitude and then 21 down at sea level. So not complaining with that either.
How did it do on the dyno?
I can't disclose that yet. I'm making a video on that. So
okay.
Yeah, right. No, I'll be I got it on the dyno down at sea level, and then I'd like to get it here, so I can kind of do a back and forth too. But
I would love to see that comparison between sea level performance and performance at 5,000 feet.
It's not fun driving it here anymore. I'll say that much. Like, it had so much more power down at sea level. It feels like it's at least like 50 horsepower less. It's very noticeable.
Do you know how much power electric cars lose at altitude?
0. Well, that's the thing. It's because they're a Carveout. I'm like, well, you know what loses less power from altitude change? Forced induction cars. So, yeah, I'm eyeballing some superchargers, but that's a 2 to 3 year away thing, especially for that car that weighs 2,700 pounds. It doesn't really need it, but yeah. And then, yeah, there's the Tesla conversions and stuff too, but I don't know if I'll go that deep on that thing.
Or you can just buy a used Tesla and
Rich rebuilds. He might yeah. I was thinking
they're fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think that the resale market is depressed because people are scared of a higher mileage Tesla and they don't know who's going to fix it, and they're actually so basic.
Yeah, it'd be really cool to see some like DIY documentation on like battery pack replacement and everything. I know there's a lot of concern about the safety with the high voltage and everything, but I don't know. It'd be cool to see, here's how you can do it to save a bit. But yeah, I think that's like my biggest Carveout thing. I've got the car back. It's back to a weekend car. Didn't eat through tires. Just had a great I was down there, and going off of the climate change thing, I've been tracking the forecast the entire time before this trip, preparing the car, making sure all my I's were dotted and my T's were crossed. I get down there, and it rains for a week straight, and we get hit by a tropical storm. And I think, I don't remember the name of the beach, maybe just Carolina Beach, just like 45 minutes away was like 5 feet underwater or something. From the tropical storm. Talk about flooding, right? Talk about natural disaster. And then I get back here and open up the news, and Helene's on the way as well. And so like I had a nice little window. At least I didn't get attacked, but it just rained the entire time. My car leaked. There's about an inch of standing water in the car. So I took out all the seats.
From like the sunroof? How did it get?
No sunroof. It's a slick top. If you're an enthusiast, that's rare. But yeah, I think it came in through a little bulkhead that I didn't seal completely, so I fixed it. But I mean, it's so dry here, it never really sees that type of moisture. But we took out the seats, like between the firewall. As far as I could tell, I saw like a little
drain through from the windshield, drain down into the.
Yeah, that's as much as I can tell. But yeah, we got it all dried up. And I mean, it sits in the garage here, and Colorado's so dry, thankfully, and I try not to drive it in the rain, so yeah. But
wow. Welcome back.
Hey, good to be back. Seriously.
And do you feel refreshed from your
I mean,
Becky's?
it was a heck of a drive out and back. You know, the distance of it kept setting in after each day that I got back on the road. But I bombed it home, and I'm glad I did. But I am stiff from like a mobility standpoint, and I don't think it's worth it. I don't think I'll take the car back out again. If I do take a car, it's going to be a very comfy one, or I'll fly at that rate. Yeah. But no, good to be back, and I'm proud of the thing. I'm really stoked it lost it, and it needs an oil change. Like, I think it was roughly 5,000 miles, all said and done.
Well, so, good to have you back.
Good to be back. Yeah. What do you got?
I in addition to prepping for our annual retreat and getting ready for some fall trips, have been, and of course the work, right? We've got new listings. I'm not like, that's 90% of the attention span, but I did get sucked into the world of bicycle maintenance. I will call it Zen and bicycle maintenance. And it's really interesting because it scratches a certain itch to maintain and get things working properly, but the costs are so much lower than anything else vehicle related, right? Like, on one end of the spectrum for my extracurricular interests when it comes to vehicles, right? If it floats, if it flies, if it rolls over the road, it interests me. And so bicycles, ever since I was very little, were an amazing way to get away from my parental home and experience freedom in a limited way. So I've always been interested in bicycles, and I found myself getting sucked into maintenance on my burner bike. So I have a bike I take to Burning Man every year, but I have not touched it in maintenance for a really long time. And this is also the bike I used to use to tow my golden retriever around Boulder and ride the cruiser ride on. I bought this bike in New York City when I worked on Wall Street. I used to ride it and commute back and forth from Brooklyn to Midtown. I took it with me to Boston. I used to ride, even in the winter, I would ride from my house in Medford to Cambridge in the snow, and it was amazing. And then when I moved to Nantucket, I also brought it with me there and used this bike there. And so this bike has been with me for a really long time. And it became my burner bike, right? I've taken the fenders off of it, and it was just getting real. It's on its second set of wheels. I wore through the brakes, the rims. You know, these are rim brakes, so the rims literally started cracking and failing because the brakes had worn through the rims on the first set. So this bike has been through a lot, and I finally realized it was making some weird noises from the rear axle. So I'm like, all right, let me just deal with that. And that was maybe June or July, and it took me down this incredibly deep rabbit hole. Shout out to Boulder Community Cycles for eventually hooking me up with a new wheel. Nice. First I replaced the spokes and rebuilt the hub, and then realized the hub is actually so damaged that it's never going to work again. So had to then take all that off again, new cassette, new chain, new tires, even because the tires had started to cut through. I cut one somehow. It was all these things. Of course, to add some lights because it's Burning Man. But this led me down just a deep, deep rabbit hole and realizing our entire fleet of bikes need maintenance. So let me deal with the e-bike next, and then I'm dealing with that right now. And it's really kind of, I don't know. It's at the end of the day of work. It's kind of a relaxing mental thing to learn how to tune a bicycle so it shifts properly. Replacing all the cables, replacing all the things you need to replace, and then, even down to the stem had never been touched. I opened it up and it was like rusting in there. I'm like, oh, and falling apart. So addressing all those things just feels really good. And now that bike is on the road, and it did great at Burning Man, although I screwed up the stem and I had to put another one on. I finally, after all these years, or maybe I've just gotten so old, I decided to put a stem riser on it so I could sit on it comfortably. Oh, is
stem the bike seat?
No, the handlebar. The stem, the handlebar stem.
Okay. Yeah. It's like I've done the car stuff, but I'm hearing all these components and I can't even picture.
It has all the same sort of interesting, like you enjoy working on cars, all the same things that I also enjoy working on cars, but at a fraction of the cost
Yeah.
It does scratch the itch. You're like, huh? And it just, then you start getting pulled into it. Like, why is it not shifting right? Why am I getting chain suck on the EV bike right now? And it's just so funny why that is satisfying to work with something old and get it working right again. It just is. But Burning Man was amazing. And that's the other carve-out is I did take that bike to the burn. It worked perfectly. No issues. And, I had to come back and finish an adjustment that I didn't quite get right. But the burn itself was fantastic. Beautiful art. I rangered for the second year in a row. I really enjoyed that experience. Did 40 credit hours, which was like 30-something hours of actually volunteering as a ranger, which, in addition to all my other duties, it was like a lot. I literally came back and was exhausted.
You're like, wait a second, I just went to work.
Right, pretty much. And had family come out for the first time, which was really cool. They seemed to really enjoy it, and then immediately went back east to my mom's 80th birthday after returning from the burn, which was really cool to see family there. And that's my carve out, my little adventures.
Go.
Yeah.
No, it's good. We're back and hitting it. It's actually really nice to be back. And as far as North Carolina goes, I got some very tempting offers to move out there from my family and from some people that I met. But you get back here and you see the landmark state, the landmarks, the mountains, all the immediate recreation, and I kind of like what I'm building here, gotta say. Yeah.
I like what you're building here too. And you North Carolina people making offers at Hamish, not appreciated. Duly noted to not authorize any more long vacations to North Carolina.
I'll tell you after this pod. On paper, it's ridiculous, but I'm good.
Well, the autumn colors are something we're really enjoying right now. We went for a great hike around Caribou Lake. I put a little video on my Instagram from that day hike and evening at Gold Hill. I mean, Colorado in the fall is really hard to beat. It is spectacular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Colorado in general for me personally. Yeah. At least over North Carolina. Yeah.
So that's our carve-out section where we just kind of randomly talk about things that are top of mind and not necessarily anything to do with real estate. But this has been House Einstein Podcast 55. If you enjoyed this podcast, please check out our YouTube. You can also see our other socials on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. You'll see my personal socials as well as the House Einstein socials. And our newsletter, which I swear will be back this fall. It does exist. It will be back. It's at houseeinstein.com if you want to sign up for that. And I think that's all we got this week. And thank you so much for joining us. We deeply appreciate you, dear listeners. Please leave us feedback and comments, like and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.